Thanks. And thanks for all our witnesses today. And it does, it's somber kind of listening to them facts in relation to the impact of COVID-19 on children. And even though, you know, children probably were spared the worst ravages of the illness of this pandemic in relation to mortality and sickness, they weren't spared in relation to the disruption in relation to their lives, because it has a huge impact in relation to children. And I can only imagine what kind of fear there was in relation to when the pandemic the onset of the pandemic, because I know most adults would have been very when they heard what was coming, there must have been a fear factor. And obviously that has seeped down to a lot of children and has disrupted their lives incalculably in some ways. So there's obviously a legacy in relation to the pandemic, what it's done to children. And obviously it's important to address them issues as quickly as possible. So just what legacy issues, in practical terms, can both agencies do in relation to the disruption that the pandemic has caused, particularly for children?
Would you like to come in, Mr. Church?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy. I suppose the short answer is we don't really know, but we're starting to see them. You know, the basis of our intervention within Childline and the ISPCC is helping children to build resilience so that they can cope with these adverse childhood events. And we know there's lots of research to show that, you know, everybody will encounter adverse childhood events. And this is certainly a significant event, as we see. The data's there. You can see from my colleagues in Bernardo's and within Childline that the anxiety levels and tensions were through the roof. I mean, that was the first indication we got was literally, I think it was the 27th of March. I think that was when the real lockdown happened. And from then on, we saw a 30% increase in our calls to Childline. And a lot of that at that stage was about fear, about the fear of getting the virus, but the fear of my loved ones, my grandmother getting it. So that was, you know, they were the initial calls that we got from Childline. As we went on, I think people began to realise this isn't just a few months, or this isn't just time off school, which is great, isn't it? This is actually going on for a lot longer. And, you know, the announcements yesterday, it looks like it's going to go on for a little bit longer as well in terms of some restrictions. And I suppose from our perspective, if our hope is that it highlights the need to at least match mental health services and the investment that we do have on the physical health services side. And that's significantly undervalued. If you look at the WHO recommendations, they're recommending 12 to 14% should be invested. We currently at 5%. So I think we're way off in terms of our supports for young children. If you look at the waiting lists on CAMS are unacceptable. I think if anything, we really need to act very, very quickly and start looking after the children and young people, because these adverse childhood events will impact society later in life.
Thanks. Susan?
Yes, I suppose what I would say first of all is I think as adults, both as parents and yourselves as elected representatives and all the professions, I think we need to do all we can to let children know that we are there for them, and that we can support them in their anxiety and also enable them to think positively about their future. I think the reopening of schools was crucial and key. I think we now need to ensure that children can thrive in schools, that they go to school, they stay in school, and they can develop to their potential. And that's why I was so pleased that actually happened, because I think when they closed, it had a massive impact on their well-being as well as the other activities. I also think that, as John has said, I think we do need a variety of services. I think we need both the generic universal services, which say that a degree of anxiety is normal, a degree of worry is normal, a degree of stress is normal. However, when that stress really begins to interfere with your everyday life and your capacity, that services are available. And that needs to be across a continuum from the services such as Childline, such as the service that we provide in communities and homes, and also then, as John's alluded to, the more specialist CAM services, when children really do need particular types of attention because of the level of anxiety, or because they've got disorders, potential disorders such as obsessive compulsive, or there is suicide ideation. So I don't know whether, Laura, whether you want to add anything or not.
Absolutely. Just to echo everything that you've just said there, Suzanne, and I think to answer your specific question, Gino, in terms of what can we do to counter the impacts, the legacy that is there post-COVID for the children and families that Bernardos are working with. I suppose one of the key ways I think we can support children into the future is by creating that sense of belonging and connectedness for them. And we do that primarily in our work on the ground in Bernardos by supporting parents to have a better understanding of their child's needs, better insight into their emotional world and what's going on for them, building up their skills to be able to support their children in their overall development, improving parent-to-child relationships and communication. So I think a key way, in terms of my work on the ground, to support children post-COVID is by supporting their parents to be better able to be that front line of support to them. And I suppose the other key piece of work that we're doing at the moment is working with children on a one-to-one in relation to building their resilience, as John has mentioned, developing their capacity to cope with stress, understand what stress does to their body, helping them to calm themselves and re-engage with those really critical opportunities like education and hobbies and social networks. So I suppose just to add, from a very practical perspective on the ground, our direct work with parents and children is helping them to develop those skills to kind of mitigate the impact of what they've been through.
Thanks, Laura. And obviously, John has alluded to services in relation to intervention, particularly around CAMHS. And we all know the very, very, very long waiting times for intervention. And obviously, early intervention is crucial in relation to children's kind of well-being. Just my final question is in relation to, and I know we spoke about it just a few minutes ago, and obviously the first kind of port of call for children is their parents, or whatever circumstances that family model is. What advice would you have in relation to, children? Obviously, anxiety is, I suppose, it's a fact of life, and it's how you deal with it. And in the last, I think, particularly in the last 18 months, that has manifested in all sorts of ways, children. It is probably, some children may have kind of inverted that. They may have that they've never had done before. But in relation to parents and siblings and their family group, because obviously the pandemic done a number of things, but I think it brought people closer, not only in communities, but also families, which is very, very important. And that kind of went a number of ways as well. Just in relation to, speaking to your children, in some ways, what's the best way to engage, particularly around certain kind of anxieties that children would have happened kind of during the pandemic and post the pandemic?
John, would you like to come in?
I think, first of all, it has to be acknowledged that the vast majority of children and young people were absolutely amazing during this COVID period. I mean, they showed incredible resilience and got back to school, got back to sports. However, the numbers we've both presented here today show that there's a worrying amount that have been left behind. Our philosophy of resilience building does involve the parents. I mean, naturally, the nature of Childline, it's a confidential service, so we get the children contacting us and they're at the centre of our service. And very often the issue is about how to communicate with the parent. They're not, my parent's not listening to me, I don't know how to talk to my siblings. So, the services we provide help children do that. But we've also, as I know Bernardos have done as well, we've also introduced a parent hub, in recognition that the parent is a significant part of this as well. And, we're moving more of our services toward early intervention and prevention. And, the one bit of advice we would give to parents is continue to talk. Talking is very, very good. Talking makes you stronger. And I think people are probably better than certainly when I was a young fella, you know, and I think that's a very good thing. But I think it's not a sign of weakness. Parents should talk from a very, very early age and make that brave move and start it very, very early. Also talk to teachers, talk to coaches, because teachers and coaches very often are the ones that recognise signs and would come to you on the sideline and just say, listen, I just noticed something about Johnny, he's been a bit quieter. Talking is very important, and listening.
Thanks, John. Suzanne?
Yeah, I mean, Laura may want to come in this too. I just a quick thing to say is what children have told us as well is they really want their parents to look after their own mental well-being and be kind to themselves and manage their lives, because if parents are okay, then children are able to feel they can be supported. They don't have to worry about their parents. So that would be something I'd like to just put into the mix there. Laura, you might want to add.
Yeah, I was going to make that exact point, I suppose, in terms of how parents can best respond to their children's mental health needs and their children's anxiety is absolutely minding their own first. And I suppose that notion of putting on your own oxygen mask before you put on anyone else's. And I suppose that sense of parents learning ways to manage their own stressors and anxieties to remain calm and I suppose focus themselves is the first kind of step really in terms of responding adequately to their children's needs. And beyond that, it's absolutely what John and Suzanne have mentioned, talking, open communication within the home. And that started from the very early years of a child's life, that sense of you can come and talk to me about anything. And I suppose not just the talking and kind of open communication, but shared joy and fun as well between parents and children. Really, really important that there's that sense of safety and nurture and fun and joy at home. And the third piece, I suppose, as John has mentioned, is that talking about your child's experience, extending out into the other spheres that they're part of, you know, their school life, their friendships, their community involvement, and making sure that there's a sense of how they're doing in all of those areas. And I suppose those would be the three layers, really, as I would see it, in terms of how a parent can best support their child's mental health. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. Gino, have you any
No,
other?
I think that's it, Francis.
Okay.
And thanks again for both organisations to coming in. And I think it's very insightful and kind of informative in relation to the kind of the impact on children. And as I said, it's been a very, very, very difficult time for everybody. But hopefully, you know, we're kind of coming to conclusion somewhat in relation to this, the terrible ravages of this pandemic. So thanks again for all your work.
Thanks, Gino.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.